So I'm Guillaume Aubchon, CTO of Digital Film Tree, as the slide implies. So we did a project with in conjunction with Universal, which was basically a test case for production in the cloud, and mainly focused. Our area of focus was metadata in the cloud. So a little bit about us. We're a post-production facility. We do TV and film. We reach all the way back to film, and then hopefully we reach all the way into the future of cloud production. We started on OpenStack in 2012, mainly as a result of our software development effort that we started up to conduct better, more efficient workflows on the productions we were doing. So, and then in 2013, we sort of started to move that OpenStack development out of strictly software development and really use it on productions. And then in last year, in 2014, we really went nuts with it and started doing full-fledged TV shows on top of OpenStack infrastructure, predominantly storage infrastructure, and moving our networking infrastructure to OpenStack, and a little bit of our compute infrastructure to OpenStack as well. So, really the four pillars of cloud for us has been obviously access everywhere. So on-demand access when and where you need it. Instant access to that material, so it's all stored in the cloud and you can gain access to that. Logged access to that material, so we're logging all that traffic in and out of the cloud, up and down, and encrypted access for security. So really, the whole concept behind Luna was centralization. So, put all your audio assets in the cloud and their metadata, subjective metadata in the cloud, video assets and their metadata in the cloud, and technical metadata, whether it be from camera systems or whatever. Put it all in one centralized place and allow us to run correlations and analytics on top of it. One of the primary focuses of this effort was to take systems as they currently stood, take systems that were currently in use, not modify their data structures, but have them all push into a centralized system. So, the key to that is no modification. So we don't really need standardization to gain data out of metadata. We don't need ontologies to be able to farm data out of all these independent systems. We can sort of take them as they are. The key behind this is really to have a third-party API. That you do need an API to push into the system. Push into a database. We use a MongoDB NoSQL database for this. And then to ultimately have a query out of that system. And, by using a NoSQL database and having full-text query search, like I said, we're able to take that unstructured data and give you value even though it's unstructured. Basically on Luna, it was a very simple workflow, media acquisition and ingest, checksum verification and proxy generation from that raw material, metadata association, so doing a metadata association right off the gate, right off of what's coming off of production, access granted to that material, and then ultimately an analysis of the data that we centralized into the system. One of the key principles we employed in this workflow is the universal identifier. So basically being able to checksum that material, hash that material as it's coming out of the camera, maintain that through proxy and editorial dailies, maintain that through ultimately AAF and EDL as cuts come out of the editorial system, place that metadata as a tag in VFX and audio dailies as they go further along in the finishing process, and then ultimately use that hash value to determine what was actively used in the cut, and therefore determine what needed to go into archive. So like I said, we really took our pointers from companies like Google, companies that are aggregating large amounts of unstructured data from millions of users that are not professionals by any means. So, and what we really found was actually running analytics on top of data was actually fairly simple. Simply because as much as we think this is a disorganized industry and ecosystem that we exist in, it's actually fairly structured compared to the world at large. So there were several open source projects we tapped to map data, to structure different databases, to map databases to one another, and so forth and so on. So this is just a very simple graph, just showing some of the analytics that we sort of pulled in terms of usable material, what ended up in the cut, how much they shot, and really push this back into production. There's many hurdles to cloud. Many hurdles to cloud, but basically it's bandwidth. There's a lack of bandwidth, but that's largely sort of self-resolving. Bandwidth is increasing all over the world. We're doing a show that starts next week. I fly to Vancouver, and we'll be pushing all the raw material up to the cloud from camera from there. So, if you sort of look under all the rocks in the world, you can find bandwidth. You can find a colo that will provide you with the sufficient speed to get even raw material, 4K, 5K, 6K, into a centralized location. Personnel, this is probably the biggest hurdle we faced, is training people, getting them to adapt to a new type of workflow, getting them to provide what we needed out of that workflow. This is unfortunately sort of a generational gap. The younger you are, the more willing you are to sort of adapt and take on this sort of workflow, and unfortunately the older you are, not globally, but to some extent, the more resistant you are to this type of workflow in production. Connectivity readiness, which actually has less to do with connectivity than it does to do with just the individual vendors that work on these projects being prepared to centralize their data. So even though we didn't need it structured, even though we didn't necessarily need an API, there were just software vendors in the world that just weren't prepared in any way, shape, or form to share their data. So this is really a studio issue where they need to enforce that, it's their data that those software vendors are holding, and they are obligated to push it back into a centralized system. And power to process. So this is also sort of self-resolving as bandwidth resolves, and compute infrastructure resolves, and we get more used to the idea of having all that material in a centralized cloud location, then obviously compute infrastructure can be built alongside that, and you're no longer transporting material. Another thing, we really honestly discovered was, like I said, we often think that we're this crazy, chaotic business, and in truth, there's just a tremendous amount of redundancy in data. So if you just centralize that material, if you centralize all that data into a singular location, you start to realize that there's just duplication of data across departments, and you can really start to increase that efficiency by just removing a lot of that redundancy and maintaining data throughout the process, so you're not dropping metadata from pre-production into production or production into post-production. It's all being held and it's all being centralized. So that was my very brief 2-second version of this presentation. Any questions? Let's just do it, people. Let's just centralize all. Just push to the cloud. Don't worry about it. Oh no, they were still reluctant. They're human beings. Um, I mean, I think it's clear that they saw the potential of the efficiencies, um, but there's still enough hurdles where we have to be very careful with how we put this out into production. On some of the larger scale projects, we've been very piecemeal and very careful about what aspects of cloud we introduce to the production, um, so that they're not scared by cloud. So it's I think everybody sees the potential. Even large studios are really starting to see the potential. I'm starting a $40 million television show, completely camera to cloud. But are we using cloud to the full extent? No, because it's just not. They're not quite ready to accept cloud to the full extent. But in terms of reducing transport, in terms of some of these more basic areas, that's how we're really realizing the benefits of cloud.
Were you able to come with some data or something like that which proved that there was, without any doubt, some benefits? One thing is to claiming there are benefits on the perception. On another one, it's to coming with something which is purely objective.
Yeah, no, we definitely came up with data that shows it's more efficient. We're releasing a giant 40-page white paper on this project, that digs deeper into the data we mined out of it and the process. And as soon as Universal allows us to release that to the global community. But, we definitely wanted to prove that OpenStack infrastructure, and federated identity on top of OpenStack infrastructure is a path forward in terms of storage and security and access. We're actually doing a keynote at OpenStack this year that's based on this premise and based on this that methodology, and that we're starting to do that in practice too. On an ABC project right now, we're granting access to marketing departments of raw material from cloud. So this is, we're starting to prove those benefits. We're just having to be very careful in the way they're laid out in to make sure, obviously, that we're not risking the delivery of a multi-million-dollar project just to prove a point.
But you're hashtagging data, and you're saying it's coming from camera to cloud or wherever it ends up. What defines a start and an end from each frame? It's like I don't understand how because we have human beings going through and identifying scenes, and there's a distinct start and I mean, is it a scene? Is that what you're defining it as?
What we do is we hash the camera original as it was shot, and then every iteration of that file carries...
Oh, so in its entirety. So
in its entirety.
So in whatever constitutes the beginning and end of that shoot is what becomes the hashtag ID.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
And then source clip.
Got it. Okay, I just wanted to speak the same language.
And then through every iteration, whether it be a VFX shot or audio associated with it, we carry that same hash.
Got it.
So it's all a nexus around that same hash. So throughout the entire process, we can always run associations. We can always find our way back to the source.
Okay. And as far as we embrace the cloud, this sounds very intriguing, but we've had serious bandwidth issues in certain parts of the world where it's just we can't get the people to embrace these types of tools. They and what about transcoding? And do you impose specs on these people as far as what what it is they're trying to ingest?
No.
Nope.
No specs.
No specs
on what they're trying to ingest. No specs on metadata. No specs on the file itself.
Wow.
We can, at this point, we can pretty much deal with. On the video side, we can deal with whatever's thrown at us. That's actually a far smaller set. And in terms, the data is a little more challenging, but as long as we sort of ingest it all as unstructured and then do our own ontology mapping on top of it, we can gain data from it.
Do you use something like Aspera or any kind of solution like that to to supplement this, or
Yeah, we do use Aspera
okay,
for pushes. We also have our own implementation of Tsunami that
Okay,
we use
okay.
for
Thank you.
accelerated file
Okay.
transport.
So you're saying that you're having problems with older people adopting processes compared to younger people in the field adopting processes. What processes were you specifically asking production people to do?
So I think that's really about information sharing. so if you're younger and you're a DIT on set, and I ask you to go ahead and extract or aggregate some additional metadata when you're backing up all that material on set and pushing it forward, that's not usually an issue. There's definitely a generational gap where you reach some people, not all, but some people are defensive about doing anything beyond what they consider their predefined role. Right.
No, I understand why they resisted. I was just wondering what specifically they were resisting.
They're resisting information. They see their job as very defined, and that doesn't include providing additional metadata or providing additional information. Beyond scribbling it on a carbon copy camera report. So that's really, and some of that's just the transition from paper to digital too. They just want a pen and a piece of paper, and they go, oh, this is the lens we used. And as soon as we go like, oh, here's an iPad, you just type it in, put it in there, and they go, no. It's just a pen. So that's part of the issues we've had overall is, the information does need to be digital. We've come up with some actually crazy OCR and methodologies for taking in written metadata, but really it should be digital, and I think a lot of that's just the transition from paper to digital, which is still sort of ongoing in production.
So I actually, one of the scripty, I believe it is, said that they had a lot of luck once they really got the iPads in the hands and they worked with the unions and whatnot. So they were kind of surprised at the acceptance rate once they really just helped walk some of these groups through things.
It's surprising how to convince people that typing is faster than handwriting. It's sort of astonishing. I thought that was more of a commonly known fact, but that's definitely been a challenge.
One other comment to you actually was we are working on those global transport issues. We are working heavily with a multitude of partners in that group, and not just giving you these on-ramps, but being able to do that without contracts. To do that, you're somewhere 2 weeks or a month or a day or two, and you need to move up 5 terabytes, 10 terabytes. So we are working on that heavily in the background on the transport team.
I'd like to point out that, it is highly dependent on where you are. We just did a project in Puerto Rico. Bandwidth non-existent. Yeah. There's still places in the world, but, for us, 80 to 90% of our productions are shot in a place where we can generally find some sort of co-location facility within a reasonable distance to upload that amount of material.
And we expect to get the maps out to you soon, so you could say, I'm here, and here's the closest on point.
just to know. Yeah.
So,
And also we've found, we started doing large cloud transport about 4 years ago. We did a project out of Toronto, and at that point it was very difficult to find. We found the bandwidth, we found the colo, but in terms of the contract, they wanted a 5-year contract or something crazy like that. We have noticed that just within the past year to year and a half, that's starting to improve, and there are providers in the world. Our provider in Vancouver is a month to month, even with remote hands at the colo if we need a reboot or a drive plugged in or something like that. So that's starting to shift, and not only for the benefit of our industry, but I think there's many industries at this point that need that sort of service. So those contracts are sort of starting to wither away a little bit.
Curious how the pricing is structured, OpEx, CapEx, project-based?
We do project-based pricing. But right now we're trying to more promote this as open source to the community. We're trying to change the community as a whole. So everything we're doing in terms of Luna, we're open sourcing back into the community. We open source back into OpenStack. For instance, changes we're making to Swift object storage to accommodate media tuning is all getting pushed back into Swift. So to make it a more media viable storage solution, cloud-based storage solution. So I mean that's really our goal at this point, is not to make a business out of it. In fact, I really don't want to make a business out of it. I want to make sure that the media industry as a whole transitions to cloud so that we all have a business in 15 to 20 years that's cloud-based.
I guess that's all the questions. So we'll be doing the next project short film probably after NAB, because this is kind of an ETC project to help and give to the community. And we'll be implying the framework that we are working on as well in that piece. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And